All right, welcome back. This is AP Environmental Science Unit 1, Unit 1 being Introduction to Ecosystems. In this video, we're going to be looking at Section 4, the carbon cycle. This will be the first of our biogeochemical cycles that we'll be looking at. Bio meaning living, geo meaning earth, chemical meaning chemical, cycle meaning a cycle. The first one we're going to look at is the carbon cycle. Now, the carbon cycle is based mostly on CO2, carbon dioxide. For the most part, producers will remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Consumers use CO2. We release it. And some carbon takes a long time to recycle. What's important about this is how humans are altering this cycle, and we are, by burning fossil fuels and releasing more carbon into the atmosphere than normal. So this is the diagram for the carbon cycle. I highly recommend that you draw, diagram, whatever works for you. Now, what you see here is natural pathways are in blue, and then the pathways that have been affected by humans are in red. Okay. So for the most part, the carbon cycle deals with carbon dioxide. There's long-term storage and short-term storage. One of the long-term storage parts, we'll start here, actually. As carbon dioxide is dissolved into the ocean, that carbon eventually makes its way into limestone or dolomite, and boom, is released by carbon in fossil fuels. No. That burning of the fossil fuels releases that carbon back into the atmosphere. So you get an idea here, all of the red, this one's a big one. This is a huge amount of carbon that we're releasing just by burning fossil fuels. Now, normally, over time, this carbon would have been released naturally, but we're releasing it with all of the other natural sources of carbon. So animals consume, the consumers, we release carbon, but we also have carbon in us, okay? A lot of, in case you didn't know this, carbon is what makes an organic molecule, and carbon is what makes us. We are built of carbon molecules. Carbon makes life possible. It's my favorite element because of that. I know, what a nerdy thing to say. Carbon can be released from plants, producers, or can be taken in by plants, producers, as you know, photosynthesis. The carbon that is in animals can actually go many different ways. So some of that carbon is released into the atmosphere through respiration. But some of it is actually stays in us. So we die, we're buried, and that's kind of how fossil fuels come out. Realistically, we're talking about millions and millions of years of organic material like plants, algae, lots of organic material being covered and compacted underground over and over for millions of years. And that's where you get coal and natural gas. So that's where we get that carbon when we talk about fossil fuels. Now, the marine food webs have producers, consumers, and decomposers. They all recycle carbon in water. We're also releasing carbon in transportation. That comes from fossil fuels for the most part. We are also causing deforestation, which is where we remove forests, and that releases more carbon. It also stops the plants that would take in that carbon from being able to hold as much carbon. We call them carbon sinks. A carbon sink is an area where large amounts of carbon can be stored for a long period of time. Now, the ocean is a huge carbon sink. Lots of carbon can be stored in the ocean where it's not in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is also a carbon sink. We just don't want it to be the largest. And for the most part, plants, we think of a carbon sink specifically if they're old growth. When we're talking about old growth, we're talking about forests that have lasted and lived for hundreds of years because they're storing carbon for a very long time. If you plant a garden in your backyard and every season you take all your plants away, you're not really creating a huge carbon sink because it's not that much. So that is the end of the carbon cycle. The next video will be all about the nitrogen cycle.